What is your sex horror story? There was a kid in class who raised his hand and asked, "What's it called when girls spray out that liquid during sex?" The teacher responded, "Girls don't do that." He said, "Trust me, it's real. I've seen it a bunch of times in videos." She never responded. That was 6th grade. In 6th grade, I had honest to God never heard the word masturbate before in my life. The teacher was explaining stuff, or maybe it was a video about safe sex or abstinence, I can't recall which, but the word came up and nothing explained what it meant. I asked, "What is masturbation?" And an awkward silence fell over everything, maybe because the teacher, a man, thought I was joking or trying to be funny. He slowly realized I was serious and then struggled so hard to explain it appropriately. It's when, you do things to feel good with yourself, you touch things and I felt terrible for asking. To this day, I don't know who was more embarrassed, me, the teacher, or everyone else. We did a thing in 9th grade where anyone could write down a question anonymously. One was about average penis size. This was in the early 90s, so that wasn't something we could just Google. The sex ed teacher, who was highly trained at coaching football but probably not at sex ed, told us between 7 and 9 inches. Probably every guy nervously glanced around the room and tried to put in their "sure, that sounds about right" face. I was convinced for about a year that I had a micropenis. Not horrible, but we were supposed to play a health Jeopardy game, but the teacher accidentally chose a sex positions one. 5th grade, they separated the boys and girls into 2 classrooms. They must have thought the boys were too young to need any sex, late 1980s, so we were read a short story, Ray Bradbury's A Sound of Thunder, where they go back in time to kill a dinosaur, by the school principal, a man. In the classroom with the girls, they papered over all the windows and had a teacher standing guard outside. The girls must have gotten the straight truth from our cranky female teacher about how they were all about to have their periods, get boobs, grow pubes, needing deodorant for body odor, everything. This was probably the first time many had heard some of this stuff. Because when the boys came back into the room, all the girls were shell-shocked, some were crying. I asked the girl who sat next to me, "What story did your class read?" A teacher asked the class, "Who can name a part of the male reproductive anatomy?" And this one kind answered with full confidence, "A vagina." One kid in my class asked if you could get STDs from having sex with a chicken. Kind of put him on the spot and was a little suspicious. Not really a horror story. In high school sex ed, our teacher had a big section on condoms, which culminated with the class betting on how stretchy they were to prove that no one should accept the "I'm too big for them" excuse. Well, one air pump and one condom later, we had our answer at about the size of a long watermelon. As our teacher was going to try to pop it, to prove they tough, our principal was doing his rounds and opened the door, saw our teacher smacking the shit out of an inflated condom and just backed away slowly. I found it hilarious. 9th grade sex ed, teacher got a wooden penis to show how to put on a condom and the condom ripped in front of everyone. And our teacher said, "In my 27 years of living, I have never seen a condom rip," and someone in the back of class said, "Damn, teacher be getting hella bitches," and he legit laughed nervously. We watched a video that tried to be hip and cool about sex ed and puberty. Direct quote: "During puberty, a woman's hips and breasts grow." Insert poorly done animation of a girl's hips and breasts enlarging to ridiculous sizes. No, not that big. This isn't too much of a horror story, but more of a moment that made me queasy. First, when discussing testicular cancer, they showed us a video of this skinny ginger guy in the shower feeling up his balls to check for tumors. Then they gave us this fake nutsack to pass around and feel. It was pretty lifelike, and you could squeeze the balls and they'd kind of pop/slide around the sack. All I could think of was doing that to my own sack, and it just made me feel uneasy. The whole experience was just awful. My friend's mom bought a sexual reproductive pop-up book. It covered both male and female. So you would open it up and the uterus and fallopian tubes would pop up at your face. You can only imagine the fun we had with that. We played STD in a cup. Everyone gets a cup of water. 1 cup of water has a bunch of dissolved starch in it, the STD. We went around swapping fluids to represent sex, and we're supposed to see if we could safely avoid STDs without protection, swapping fluids. At the end, we find out who had the STD by dropping iodine into each cup, turning the starch blue. If it turned blue, you tested positive. Everyone in the class ended up with the STD, even me, because even though I only had one partner, and they had only had one before me, the one before them was a sloat and had everybody's fluids. Honestly, a very good exercise and warning, except for that one kid. At the end, he dumped his test results and refilled his cup at the bubbler in order to claim he didn't have the STD, and he was good for more fluid swapping. Honestly, another good lesson on assholes who will lie about being clean. Use protection. Kids. Being singled out by the teacher because I had a unique name for a scenario along with a boy who I didn't like. She used our names in a scenario talking about how a relationship develops. We had to stand in front of the class while she described random scenarios where we might end up having unprotected sex, and why it was bad. I was not attracted to this boy, and I'm sure he wasn't attracted to me either. Hearing her talking about us having sex was nightmarish. 6th grade sex ed. At the end of the class, the teacher opened the floor for questions. She said we could ask anything as long as it was a serious question. The only question I remember is when a kid, male, asked, "It's okay to have sex with your sister, right?" The teacher stared at him for what felt like a minute and said no. Haha, I asked what oral sex was and my teacher said, "You know what sex is? You know what oral means? Figure it out." I did not figure it out. I thought oral only meant oral presentation as in speaking and figured it was sex where you talked a lot. 6th grade also, as a joke my friend asked the male teacher what does cum taste like. He answered salty. My sex ed teacher brought a kid up to the front of the classroom wearing a shirt that had 2 long sleeves and explained what an uncircumcised penis looked like. Teacher hit a girl in the face with a dildo. We did not learn how to put on condoms that year. The school had a briefcase of mounted dildos so that every health class could learn how to put on condoms. It was kept under lock and key obviously and was an object of great interest to the student body, so when we got to class and saw the case on the teacher's desk we knew what was up. The teacher was 100% a nightmare and very nasty to students. So he's talking about the importance of condoms and he takes one of these mounted dildos out and sets it on this one girl's desk. This girl was pretty sheltered/naive and you could tell she was terribly uncomfortable having this thing on her desk. So the teacher picks it up and starts waving it in her face while asking her if she was uncomfortable, while she just sat there in silent horror. He started waving it more aggressively and then bam! Right on the face. The girl screams and the teacher immediately ran to throw the thing back in the case. Case locked up and put behind the desk. No more talk of condoms for the rest of the year. Edit. Lots of questions of whether the teacher got fired or punished in some way. He did not get fired for this, he was still working there 3 years later but is no longer at the school. It's possible he got punished behind closed doors but there was no big aftermath. He was mainly a gym teacher and basketball coach, who unfortunately also did health. My mom's the sex ed teacher. No context needed. In 6th grade I learned the term popping your cherry from some friends in sex ed class. I went home with this newly found knowledge and accused my older sister of having her cherry popped. She broke out in tears and my mom grounded me for a week. 9th grade health with Mr. Lamb. Dude was an absolute gem of a human being, but his voice sounded exactly like Barry White. Like all the time. So anytime he tried to say anything remotely sexual, it sounded like the voiceover for a raunchy R&B song. Which made the freshmen erupt in laughter. Constantly. Poor guy just couldn't get through a lesson for 3 straight weeks. Got it too late. It caused a lot of stress when we found out we were using birth control pills wrong. Did your doctor not explain to you how to take them? My girlfriend and I were both 15. She would steal them from her older sister and we would each take one before we would start doing things. This went on for most of a summer. Edit. After this blew up. To answer a few questions. I am male. The year was 1990, so no Google. We were lucky to not get pregnant at the time, and nothing happened to her sister either. We didn't last long after that summer. When we found out we'd been doing it wrong, we got stressed out. We both said things we couldn't take back, and the relationship fizzled away. We never spoke again. I still regret the way it ended. More of a lack of sex horror story, and thankfully short. A guy who I had a crush on, both of us seniors, pulled me aside one day and asks, "So when a girl has her period she just lays an egg in the toilet, right?" I'll be honest. I'm not sure if I answered him or just stared at him. In my school sex ed was co-ed until gender-specific issues came up. So when it came time to learn how to self-check for cancers we split into groups. When we were sent away to watch a film on testicular cancer, I said, "Alright fellas, let's watch the ball game." And got detention. I still think it was a grade A joke. A horror story in terms of education. In grade 9, we were given a paper that had an equation that said having safe, protected sex was equal to Satan. It went. Condoms and birth control lead to premarital sex and sex without the intention of procreation. Premarital sex and sex without the intent to have children is a sin. Choosing to be sinful is the job of Satan. Condoms equals Satan. Needless to say we had a lot of pregnant girls in our graduating year. The only thing I remember from sex which was taught by the creepy lunch lady. Lunch lady unrolls a condom and stretches it as far as she could. Then she says, "I know none of you are this big, so this will fit any of you." Edit. I get it. Most of you on Reddit have above average units. There is an appropriately sized raincoat for you too. No, one size does not fit all. Find one that fits you. They exist. This was a co-ed class of around 200. I have no idea why the lunch lady was teaching this. She didn't teach anything else. The responses were pretty much the same as what you see in this thread. The room erupted and nobody really listened to anything else she said. My sex ed was a series of books on cassette tapes from some Christian organization my dad made me listen to in the car with him one awkward summer day. Suffice to say, my actual sexual education came courtesy of one insanely understanding young lady from the Craigslist dating section. Our first night together she just said, "Wow, you really have no idea what's up, do you?" and proceeded to walk me through shit for a few hours. Honestly, hats off to that woman, because there's no way I was good at anything, but she invited me over a few more times after that, and even though we never so much as actually dated, I still regard her with a massively fond respect. Catholic middle school. In 8th grade they made us watch a video that was basically "don't have sex or you'll die." The woman speaking in the video literally said she could tell if a girl has had sex or not by looking into her eyes and gazing into her spirit. Aside from basic biology and anatomy, that was the only formal sex ed that I received in school. That's horrifying. My health teacher in high school told us condoms are strong and they are very stretchy. Don't believe any guy who goes, "I'm too big, it won't fit all this or it's just gonna break anyways, why bother putting one on?" She then produced 3 condoms available for pickup in the health office, proceeded to pull one over her hand and up past her elbow and her arm like it was a fancy costume glove, spread her fingers out as wide as they can go, stretched 2 remaining of said condoms over her cowboy boots, and walked around non-stop for over 6 hours before one of them broke. Not necessarily a horror story, but that shit will haunt my dreams forever. Lamau. Unintentional sex ed happened for me in 4th grade. In an assignment we had to invent a new town relating to the gold rush. I named it K-porn, and I thought I just made a new word, did not know what porn was. My imagination sucks and the town name was similar to a name I recently heard, K-porn. We had to give the reason for the name and my unimaginative mind said they didn't know why. A teacher-parent conference later I was confused why they were asking me about the word porn and if I knew what it meant. Zero explanation on their end. So curiosity hits me and I Google porn. That's how my 4th grade teacher introduced me to online pornography and wanking. Story from my mom. She taught a middle school special ed class. Her and a male colleague handled sex ed. Her first year on the job, they passed around a box so that students could write questions anonymously. The male teacher pulled a question and said he couldn't answer. Mom, wanting to be helpful, asked if it was a female question. The male teacher tried to warn her. The question was, "What does cum taste like?" My mom was so dedicated to educating these kids that she launched into a hypothetical discussion about how most body fluids have a high salt content, so it might take salty. The boy who wrote the question could not contain himself and blurted, "My girlfriend said it tastes like gummy bears." My mother never ate a gummy bear again. 2 interns were teaching us, 7th grade, about HIV. Interns, so, you can catch it by oral, vaginal and anal sex. That guy in the back, what about nasal sex? Everybody, shut up, Diego. Interns, well, the worst that could happen is dying by asphyxiation. Our sex teacher told us that girls who had sex before marriage were like chewed pieces of gum. A friend of mine almost started puking during sex ed when we were watching a movie about childbirth in class. It wasn't very explicit but the blood was enough to get him as pale as the wall. Poor dude. Not really a horror story, rather a hilarious one. Catholic school sext and they break up girls and guys into 2 rooms. A nun teaching the girls and a priest teaching the boys. Honestly probably more informative than my friends who went to public school, taught about abstinence as well as condoms and whatnot. Anyways, the priest talks to us about masturbation and I'll never forget his line. Masturbation is perfectly normal. In fact 95% of men admit to doing it one time or the other. The other 5% are liars. I think it was 8th grade sex ed. It wasn't great as a whole but they had a guest speaker come in one day from a place they'd been using for years. She comes in and ends up talking about how you shouldn't have sex before marriage. What if you have a kid and the relationship doesn't last? How is your future spouse going to feel about a kid you had with someone else? How can you do that to the person you're gonna marry for the rest of your life? I started absolutely bawling when class ended. I tried holding it in but I couldn't. All I could think is how terrible I was, for being that kid. Other kids in my class were livid for me and stood up to the lady. Told my mom after school and she immediately called them, mad as hell. The teacher himself called to apologize the next day and said that the lady would not be coming back and they wouldn't be going back to that company either. ETA, this was a long time ago and my step-parents are both lovely people who have always made me feel like they're a kid.